I want to take advantage of the last 30 minutes in order to ask maybe the hardest question. And we all said that it would be great if we could come up with actual experiments that would test these theories and even compare between them. And this is what people have been trying to do, especially in recent years. So what would make you change your mind? So what result, what finding would make you say, you know what, maybe I got it wrong?
Looking at me.
Yeah, why not? Why not?
Well, it's a very nice question. I was thinking hard about it and trying to be honest about it, and I think it's this hidden assumption that there is really one central state of consciousness, and that's really central to the global workspace idea. There's one at a time, and maybe 200 milliseconds later you can have another one, but for a given moment, if you have one, you don't have others. And I could see experiments that might disprove that. Maybe we are wrong, maybe Victor is closer to the truth, maybe we underestimate once again the parallel processing in the brain, and maybe there is more than one central state or central sharing system in the brain. So I'm not sure exactly what experiments to do with that, and I could see also the flip side of this coin, which is I think this is potentially a severe criticism to Victor as well. So maybe let's push the hot potato somewhere else. But because I do see that as a problem. If you have loops within the visual system, well, you think this is the visual consciousness, but what happens to the other cortices? Are they also able to have their own loops? Like maybe the auditory cortex has its own loops, right? And do they have a second consciousness at the same time? From all we know, and that's really the central core hypothesis of the global workspace, is that we really have one state at a time. And the experiment is that if you attend to audition, you really cannot perceive a competing visual stimulus at the same time. So what happens in your theory, Victor? Is it possible to have multiple such loops in different systems and all of these consciousnesses are running at the same time?
Multiple draft?
Multiple drafts.
Yeah, something
well,
like
the multiple drafts, the idea is that there's still one
final
outcome at a given moment.
Well, certainly, if you have vision versus audition, you need, of course, normally they get synchronized and integrated, that you see and hear at the same time.
But how, if it's all local, how are they synchronized and integrated? Now the question strikes me. No, really. Like now everyone's seeing me, so they have, let's say, recurrent processing of, the way my lips move, and they hear me, so they have.
Now we're talking multisensory integration, and that's parietal cortex stuff. I know very little about that actually, but it's something along those lines. But there too, you can have multisensory integration, I think, without having access or report of that.
No, but I think that Stan's question is, it's a hard one, right? So if you have, multiple loops.
Wasn't that question actually what would criticize?
Yeah, but we will get back to him.
But I did my bit.
Don't worry. But we're using his very clever, questions to depress you, right? So.
But I see it as a criticism of my work. If you can show that there are multiple loops in different areas at the same time, and somehow you could prove, I think you can't, but if you could prove that there are multiple phenomenological states at the same time, that would be a very severe criticism of global workspace and any global integration theory, basically.
Okay, but how would we?
And I think you believe in that.
How would we then prove that there are different phenomenological states?
Well, but that's your problem. That's your problem from the beginning.
But let's go back to the hard question. The hard question is, if you have multiple loops in auditory cortices, in somatosensory, in visual, in vision, then how many consciousness do you have? What is the unification, and so on? So I think that's the simplest and hardest question.
Yes. Well, then you have, indeed, if they're not interconnected, which I think.
But for your theory, it doesn't matter because
which would be very difficult. Then indeed you have separate audition and vision, which is of course.
So I need a recurrency between B1 and STG, something like that.
No, I think he was saying that you have separate conscious experiences for.
Well, now I'm lost. What
do you say?
Let's make it very simple. I want to give you an example. You're driving your car, listening to the radio.
Yeah.
from all that you told us so far, you're still phenomenologically conscious of the driving, the visual part of the driving, because you have these loops, it's all being processed and so on. And yet you are listening to the radio, so you're also, and I would argue, more conscious of the radio, because that's what you're attending to. So,
Agree. Yeah.
So you have two consciousness at the same time.
I guess.
It seems to me this is really a problem for what you are.
So you're saying yes?
You're saying yes.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
And then when I'm, also this.
You have two consciousness at the same time, but one is not conscious.
That's what you're saying.
But so I want to also...
the driving of course, the driving example I think is really an example of a failure of memory instead of phenomenology. When you say, I mean, it's so weird, actually, totally weird to say to people, you were driving without seeing what you were doing. I mean,
it's also weird to say to someone who say, I don't see it, you do see it.
I mean, why can't a lot of it be unconscious vision? I mean, a tennis player can respond very quickly without knowing how they've responded to a very fast serve.
That's feed-forward stuff, by the way.
No,
but it actually is.
Yes, but psychologically, why do we have to admit one case and not the other? I think the driving example has derailed everything.
Because there are good, as I tried to explain, there are good scientific reasons, well, to go my way.
But to pick up on
but I mean, for one thing, if we talk about, I think vision is very much about perceptual organization. How do higher order thoughts explain perceptual organization? I don't see how. How does Global Workspace explain perceptual organization? They don't. So that critical aspect of vision, which is the most maybe combined to next to integration, and integration is very similar, of course, in that sense. And many, by the way, of these fundamental aspects of consciousness that IIT postulates. How do these theories explain those? I really don't.
Actually, I think that for me this was a key turning point when I read Bernard Barr's book, which I still recommend. I think it's a very good book, and I suddenly realized that the problem of consciousness was not the problem of everything about the brain. So the problem of consciousness is not the problem of perceptual organization. The problem is the problem of conscious perceptual organization. There's a lot of perceptual organization which are going without consciousness, and that's fine, and that's a whole field, and your experiments are beautiful, the work with Peter Hofzimmer and so on, but they don't have to do with consciousness necessarily. And in fact, the problem of consciousness is relatively localized. It's not the problem of the whole brain.
But I do want to also make it a bit harder for you, asking if the experiment you suggested is a non-feasible one. Like, how can I show that there are multiple consciousnesses at the same time? Like, if it's not a test that I could actually run, then,
No, it could be.
But what about in the split brain? So in that case,
sure, but in this case, there could be two consciousnesses, right? And look like it's like that. Right? Yeah.
So
But there too, the person will say, there's just one.
No, the right hemisphere may report by pointing that there is another
but
report.
then you get to the issue, what do you consider evidence of having a conscious experience? Is it, in that case, it's the pointing, but in blindsight, we don't consider pointing evidence of conscious experience, for example.
It is extremely different, honestly, than a split brain.
But
the blind sight shouldn't be overrated.
One of the main points I'm always trying to make is that much of this whole debate is very much about what we consider evidence of having a conscious experience. And as long as we don't agree on that, and I just think we don't, then we will keep having these debates, I'm afraid.
Yeah, so just to have enough time.
So what's your criterion for having a conscious experience? That's whether, and in your case, it's things like access and reportability, and also tied to attention, working memory. In your case, it's higher order thoughts. I mean, that's all fine, but why are these the criteria? In my case, obviously, it's more like perceptual organization and stuff like that. Why do we have these different criteria? And how do we arbitrate between them? Because we can do experiments till our socks wear off. That won't solve that issue.
I love that.
I think you summarized the point.
What are the minimal properties that then any theory should explain? Let's agree now on those. So what I heard is like, we're going to be in this debate forever, unless we say, okay, let's agree on one at least. that every theory needs to explain.
Well, didn't we do that in the first half?
No, we didn't. No, we didn't in terms of what is the minimal properties of consciousness that we need to explain. But this goes back to, like, so you could say, like, in IAT, there is 5, like, so
5 plus 1. Existence.
Yeah.
6.
Yeah. So,
I thought yours is more of an empirical question. Like, how do we design the right empirical test?
No. It's about terminology ultimately.
Exactly,
So
no.
what do you consider? What do you consider state of consciousness?
How do you define consciousness? What is, again, going back to the question, what is the explanandum? What are we trying to explain?
I thought we went through that in the first half.
Yeah, so but just so we have time, let's go again to the question of experiment. So what would falsify or change your mind?
So a different question now.
Yes. No, so it's the question that Stan answered, right? So
Okay.
what experiment
did
or
it.
finding
Ugly.
would change your mind?
Just to re-answer the first question, I think for me, it's the functional cluster of these properties and I don't think there's going to be one empirical test. And I think this is where we often come unstuck. That, for me, if there's a functional cluster of properties that, we can assay with tasks and metrics like meta d prime and so on, that we can start getting a handle on it. But I think a lot of these talking past each other comes from saying we've got like this one criterion point and that's where we're going to differ. So I guess I would just appeal to a plurality of measures rather than just saying we've got to have one.
And what would make you change your mind?
And what would make me change my mind? So I think that I was thinking about this a lot. I think a lot of things would make me change my mind.
Give me one.
So, so I think that if it were possible to, in somehow, inactivate or remove the higher order level, and I don't think we're yet there yet, but hopefully we can, as we refine the model and the tasks, we might be able to get there. And then the subject still claims awareness of the content that higher order state is in some sense pointing to, then I think we would have to reformulate.
But look, this is an experiment that one can do. So in patients that actually have epilepsy, they're going to do cooling, for instance, during surgery, right? Mm-hmm. So, which area in prefrontal cortex should we cool?
That I think is the problem. So I've talked quite a lot to Hak-Wan Lau about this, and I think that he's more skeptical that we could ever do this because that higher order state is a computational quantity. It's not like that brain region has the state. That I think is where it becomes more difficult.
So where is it then?
We don't know. As in, like, it's not. I don't think it's going to be in one place. Mm-hmm. I think Stan mentioned something similar, that it's a network property, and that we're not going to say it's in that region of prefrontal cortex.
It's just redundant.
That region of parietal cortex.
So let me, because it's just redundant. So you say it's a network property. Is this redundancy?
What do you mean by redundancy?
Redundancy. So you have one first order state, right? And then you have like many pointers in prefrontal that goes there. So it's just redundant. Do they add something? Because it's different, right? So if they add, then then there should be something that you can knock out.
Yeah, so
it's redundant.
It might be possible that there's a nicely organized code in one particular brain region, and that would be nice for doing these kind of experiments. But I think that, and I'm relatively optimistic that we might be able to discover those kind of confidence codes that make the difference. But I'm just saying that other people working in this area are less optimistic. So it's all about how it's coded, and I think for that we're going to need more mechanistic models rather than just the model that we're working with is very abstract. It's really just a few lines, a few equations, really, but it helps us refine qualitative predictions for the experiments.
So if I understand you correctly, it adds the qualitative experience of absent versus present in a way?
Well, for the model that we're working with,
for your model,
we give phenomenal magnitude.
But you don't know whether this added component is located in a specific area in the front. That's the claim.
Right.
Okay.
Or how it's implemented at all, really. It could be neuromodulatory. That's another interesting way to investigate it.
Oh, yeah.
Melanie, what would make you change your mind?
For us, there's several types, I think, of evidence that would really challenge IIT that I think are feasible, and we can, again, work as a team on it. One type of evidence would be actually, for example, to compute an appropriate approximation of phi and show that it's higher, for example, during generalized tonic-clonic seizures when brain activity is increased, and then you lose consciousness. That would be a serious challenge for IIT. Yeah. Another one would be.
But would it make you to change your mind? Because then you could say, well, I need to have a better computation.
So
Did you
we
say
know
it's
because
make you to change
we
your
need
mind?
to kind of agree with how to approximate. So as I said, it can be approximated in ways that we can agree with the experimenter who was an experiment. It was actually like your best attempt. But not only that, but also say if that approximation of phi was found to be like appropriately computed, and we agree together on how it's done, yeah, and we are doing it, and we want to challenge it, and we invite you to join the effort. So, but an appropriate approximation of phi that would also be, say, higher at the level of, molecules rather than neurons or microcolons, or at the level of the temporal grain of a millisecond or 10 seconds rather than the temporal grain of experience. Yeah, so that would be a challenge, a serious challenge for us, and I would actually then have to change my mind. And then the second thing is actually, I think, about the quality of consciousness. Like we have this account now that the extended feeling of extendedness that characterize spatial experiences should be accounted by grid-like networks, yeah, in the cerebral cortex. And so if that was found not to be true, that would also be some pacification of IIT to take seriously and make me change my mind as well. Yeah.
You didn't tell us what would change your mind, Victor.
I didn't? Oh. Well, actually, I did change my mind in the past.
Already in this debate.
Yeah. No, not.
Okay.
No, but for example, initially, the claim was that you need feedback all the way back to primary visual cortex for consciousness. Now it's a bit different from that. Well, what would change my mind? Yeah, well, obviously, if someone could show that you have recurrent interactions and a person is sitting in the screen and there's nothing like working memory or attention or anything else preventing then the person to become conscious, well, of course that would be problematic. I can, by the way, also imagine me going even more first order in the sense that it could even be that you have conscious experiences without recurrent interactions, so that just any neural activation already gives you some sort of conscious experience. I can see myself going in that direction, and then even
feed forward,
become even more panpsychist than I already am. So those things I can see happening, for example. Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe if there was a drug, I don't know, I'm trying to see what this feed-forward experiment could look like. It seems very difficult to cut all top-down connections, right? Yeah. But how would you do it with a drug or pharmacological agent or optogenetic?
Well, of course, we did these experiments where we do these experiments, or not me, but well, anyhow, the people do these experiments where they try to sort of selectively block these feedback connections, for example, with NMDA receptor blockers and stuff like that. But of course, it's really impossible. I think you will kill a person if you really block all feedback connections. But yeah, of course, there are nice pharmacological interventions that you can think of. And by the way, anesthesia, for example, apparently, given the results I showed in one of these slides, apparently is a very effective way to indeed quite selectively block these recurrent interactions. But of course, the problem with anesthesia is that indeed, well, people don't seem to have phenomenal experience there, although we don't know.
I see that we already have a question. Do we have the microphone? Oh, here it is. Do you want to close?
I have the microphone, so I guess.
Who are you? Where are you?
Okay, so last question, and then we part as friends.
Okay. Thank you for this consciousness conversation. I'm really glad to be here. There was some degree of disparity between maybe your conception that consciousness is physical and the public, and I think that may be because the definition or conception of physicality or materiality is divergent between us and maybe in respect to time-lapse. So maybe in the future or foreseeable future, our conception of what is matter may or may not change. So I was just wondering, in in this consciousness debate or consciousness field, how do you feel about the fact that different people conceive matter differently, and that maybe your own perceptions of what is matter may change?
A small question for the end.
Well, I think it's rather an issue of that if we're all honest, we don't have a clue about what consciousness is. No, I mean, so it's so mysterious that you can have conscious experiences from 1.5 kilograms of fat and proteins in your head. So, I mean, how that is possible is beyond any understanding as far as I'm concerned. And I think that's the main reason why...